Together here. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to History Matters and So Does Coffee. I'm not holding up the mug because I forgot to bring my mug cover and I don't want to reveal the mug. I'm very happy to be here in a different apartment for a couple of weeks. And we're going to be talking about January 6th today, although maybe not in a way we've talked about it before. But before I plunge into that, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted to be with you today. And this is how it works. If this is your very first time joining us, Joanne's going to talk for about 30 minutes about today's topic. Feel free to chat. The chat is already very active this morning. But if you have questions about today's topic, we would love it if you would put those down below in the Q&A. I'll be back in about 30 minutes and we'll start looking at some of those questions.
Excellent. And as I always say, if you are here for the first time or one of the first times, say so in chat. Tell people that you are new or new-ish to History Matters, and you will get a robust welcome from the wonderful History Matters community, which is indeed a community. I keep trying to explain that to people. My latest attempt to explain the community here is they have meetups in real life. Like, that's the proof. Okay. So let's talk about January 6th, which is not what I thought. I thought obviously every week, given the times that we live in, there are any number of topics that we could be talking about, and this week is no different. So I thought, well, are we going to talk about the vice presidential debate? Are we going to talk about the vice presidency generally and what it's supposed to do and what the job is for? I sort of cycled through. But every day I began to cycle through topics. January 6th kept just coming back into the loop. So actually, I'm going to come back to this momentarily, but in its way, it did indeed come up during the vice presidential debate this last week. Um,
Joanne, if you can hear me, you're frozen. We can't see or hear you. Okay, I think she's going to try and log out and come back in, John.
Okay.
I thought it was my Wi-Fi because I'm at such a high elevation, and Thomas Jefferson didn't have Wi-Fi when he built Montauk, which is where I'm broadcasting from if you tuned in late. This used to be the worst spot to try and get Wi-Fi connection in, I think, all of Albemarle County. And we used to always laugh and say it's because TJ didn't like Wi-Fi. And the kids would laugh and they'd say, do you think Thomas Jefferson would have been a iPhone or a Android user? And then they would debate.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he's definitely iPhone. He's really a gadget guy. He wanted to have, the sleekest, coolest tech. So most of the kids and I would lean towards iPhone. But we said that we thought John Adams would definitely be Android. And Hamilton would have probably still had a flip phone. Oh, that's so funny. Oh, I hope she can get back in. I don't know if this has ever happened before.
Not that I can remember. No.
I mean, we've had frozen for a second or two, but we've never had it.
One time she was pre-recording and we got through it. It was like a Tuesday night. And when she wrapped up she did about a half hour, I realized that I had forgot to hit record. So I actually had to do it all over again, but I don't think she's ever frozen like this live.
She's texting me. Yep, here she comes. Okay, I think she can hear us maybe.
I can.
Oh, there she is.
Just
Oh,
happened, guys.
oh, you're a little frozen again. We can.
Okay, I'm gonna continue where I left off here. Hang on.
Okay.
I actually had a plan. Okay. So I don't know why Zoom went away and why I
Your
couldn't get
image
back
is
in. So
frozen.
my apologies, folks, for a little bit of chaos here at the beginning, but I'm going to go back to what I was saying, which is, oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Oh, good. Okay, I'm going to try. Um, Problems of switching locations. I was saying that January 6th is back, and that it came up in the debate. And then I was about to quote Republican Scott Walker, who is the former governor of Wisconsin, who said, voters are long over January 6th. Walz and the moderators are obsessed, while most Americans are focused on issues related to high prices, border security, public safety, and free speech. They are tone deaf, they meaning Walz and the moderators. Okay. Then the Jack Smith report, in addition to the vice presidential debate. But it was the Scott Walker quote that grabbed me. Voters are long over January 6th. And as the title of today's episode suggests, I'm not over January 6th, and I don't think most voters are either. But I mean that in a way that is beyond partisanship. I think January 6th, obviously, it's being used in any variety of ways, for partisan purposes. Wonderful, loyal people attacking the Capitol is the argument of some. I'm not even going to actually go into the partisan dimensions of how people are deploying and misinterpreting or memory holing, to use the wonderful term I'd never heard before the last year or two. Whatever people are doing with January 6th and how they're using it for partisan purposes. And again, I have to say, particularly on the right, that's not what I'm interested in today. What I'm interested in and what I want to talk about today is why it matters, why it still matters. And this last week was a reminder. Yes, we're coming up upon an election. Yes, we're now in October, not very far, a couple of weeks away. It has reappeared, but it has reappeared in part for partisan reasons and in part because it's about an election and because we're about to have an election and it touches on absolute fundamentals of our political system, of our country. That's what I want to talk about today, is why it matters, why I won't get over it. I don't know how other people feel about that, and I have chat turned off, so I can't tell. But that's what I want to talk about today. I wanted to mention, though, first off, about why Jack Smith, I anticipated in the chat as to people will say, well, why is that report coming out now? Isn't that just purely partisan? I at least want to state the explanation as to the timing. And then I want to launch into a more historical look at why I think January 6th eternally matters. But okay, according to my research this morning, the court ruled this, I can't believe I don't know whether July is a long time ago or just happened, but July is when the Supreme Court ruled that former presidents are entitled to immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts. In early September, Judge Chutkan outlined a schedule for the parties in the case to file briefs on the immunity question and other issues. So what was unsealed on Wednesday, Jack Smith's report, was a 165-page report on this fact, right? His arguments about what that really immunity, presidential immunity in January 6th, what that means. His basic argument is that what happened on January 6th was a private matter, not a official public duties matter. And he goes through the report explaining how, and I'm not going to go into great detail here. Maybe that's a topic for another conversation, particularly given that I don't know what's happening with the internet connection right now. But at any rate, the main argument in Smith's report is that Trump was very much excluding his formal advisors and talking privately with private people about a campaign matter that actually wasn't part of his official presidential duties. So that's the general take of that report. What I want to talk about, again, is Why does it matter so much above and beyond however it's going to affect the election that we're rapidly approaching? And the basic reason for that, and I'm going to go back into my time, the founding era, to talk a little bit about this, is that in essence, January 6th was a crime against us. It was an attack on us, right? The Capitol is our house. It's the people's house. And what happened on January 6th was a fundamental attack on our political process, our constitutionally mandated political process and system of government. Regardless of the politics of anyone involved, that's what happened that day. So whatever comes of it legally and whatever comes of it politically, the fact of the matter is the attack on the Capitol to try and stop a free and fair election from happening, and it was proven free and fair in the court cases after court cases after court cases coming up to try and prove fraud, and none of them proved it. That was a crime against us, we the people. That's what I want to talk about here. And I've said it before about the Constitutional Convention. I want to say it differently in this context. Obviously, the Constitutional Convention is important largely because it produced the Constitution. But what mattered over everything in that convention was process, right? So they weren't calling themselves the Constitutional Convention at the time. That's what we call them. But at any rate, they were creating a constitution. Obviously, a constitution is about process. What they understood themselves as doing was creating the basis, a new basis for a national system of government. The Constitution is remarkably brief for what it does. It's the framework of a political process and structure. That's what it does. And the assumption at the time was a lot of other things would be filled out as the government went into effect. But the Constitution creates a process of government in a broad sense. So that mattered. And that was a fundamental thing that the framers thought that they were doing. The fundamental importance of it is that they were creating a process, a constitutional process of governance. And what that meant was, and Jefferson conveniently says this after the election of 1800, I know I've quoted this before, when someone says, wow, what would you have done if it had all gone wrong somehow? And he said, well, we probably would have had some other kind of convention, constitutional convention. We would have tweaked it a little bit, and then we would have gone right back into play because that's what the Constitution is for. It's about process. Process was so important to the federal convention that not only were they concerned about the political process that they were creating within the Constitution, but they were focused also on the process of creating the Constitution. James Madison's amazing notes in which he was keeping track of the arguments and how people were arguing and the actual process of creating the Constitution, that mattered too. The reason he was keeping all of those notes was to preserve the process of creating the Constitution, because what was happening at that moment was not the norm. It wasn't typically what happens when governments are created, right? Hamilton says that. I don't have it in front of me, but the first paragraph of the first Federalist essay, Hamilton says essentially that we are deciding here for all time if you could begin a government this way through reflection and choice, or if governments are always going to be a product of chance and conflict and warfare. So reflection and choice, that's what was supposed to be happening. That was a process, and it was a different kind of process for creating a government. So process was what the Constitutional Convention was about. It's what the Constitution is about. It was what the framers thought they were putting into effect, a different process of government and governance. And what made the American process different was the degree to which we, the people, were at the center. We, the people, mattered. Now, the founding generation had very different ideas about ultimately who was included in we when it came to the political process, when it came to certain rights, when it came to any number of different things. And I have to say that your internet connection is unstable, keeps appearing in front of my face on the screen. So forgive me if I look a little distracted. Next time we do this, I will not be sitting here in the hope of having a more stable connection. But at any rate, the federal convention Their focus was on the process and on the fact that we, the people, in some way or another, they understood that differently from us, would be at the center of the political process. That's what makes us us as a nation, is that fact, right? Is that our political process puts we, the people, front and center from the beginning, by definition, in the Constitution. And according to the Constitution, registers our will through free and fair elections, through what you could think of as a constitutional pact that we all agree and act under, unites us as a nation. We all obviously disagree on precisely what it means and always have, probably always will. But that doesn't mean we don't fundamentally agree that on some level, that constitutional pact is what joins us on the most fundamental level as a nation. So basically, part of what I'm saying is process matters, and more than anything else, how matters. You look back to the founding era, and they were focused constantly on how things got done, because the how would determine the essence and the core and the meaning of whatever was going on. So, for example, after they create the Constitution at the convention, and now they have to decide, now what do we do? Like, how do you put a constitution in motion? Who approves it? Should we go to the Confederation Congress and say, hey, Confederation Congress, would you look at our Constitution and decide whether it's good or not? And the convention, basically the decision is made at the time that the how in this case, what seems right, what seems fair, is to allow each individual state to decide for itself whether or not it wants to ratify the Constitution. So again, the how matters. There wasn't some grand fiat of like, poof, now here we are, it's happening, it's all in effect, whatever happens, happens, and you have no say. The how at that moment was, okay, so now states can figure this out for themselves, whether they want to join this or whether they don't want to join this. That was a how that really mattered. And I will say, I'll see if I can, actually, our wonderful folks here, our wonderful community can probably find it. I think possibly through the Founders Online database through the National Archives, they might have the papers of the ratification debates up and available. I know it's available through a paid, expensive database. I can't remember if it's available on that one, but if it is, or if through an educational institution or library, you have access to the papers of the ratification and the papers proceed state by state, you can look into that and you can see, I was about to say play around, but maybe not all of us consider that playing around. You can go to the papers of the ratification process and see how each state debated, see the different sides, not everyone agreed, and how they made a decision. The how matters, even in deciding whether or not you want to take the Constitution into effect. And the Constitution is a big document of how. All of that matters. And if you declare a war on the fundamental how that we all live under as a people, you're in essence declaring warfare, and I mean that not in a literal sense, but you're declaring warfare on we, the people, right? If you have a problem with an election, we have a how for that. We have a process for that. There are means to contest elections if you think they're not fair. They're legal means, right? There are ways in which you can step forward and say, I don't think that was fair. I protest. I think it was fraudulent. And indeed, Trump and his team did that again and again and again and again in courts, right? Not fair, not fair. It wasn't fair. There was fraud. And again and again and again, the court said, we actually can't find any fraud. I think, and again, I have not yet, given that I was moving this last week, read in great detail Jack Smith's report. I do know that it includes in it some new information, including unnamed, they're called like P5, P6, whatever the numbers that are assigned to these people. One of them says, we know that the evidence of fraud, it's a lie, right? So still, there was a means to present that, to argue that. There was a how for contesting the election. It was taken advantage of, And according to that system, that process, there was not fraud in that election. One way or another, what unites us as a people is our agreement to live under a briefly sketched out, still vitally important constitutional pact. That is what joins us together. And it's a pact grounded on the fact that we agree on the process of governance, the fact that there should be free and fair elections, the actual existence of the rule of law, that there is a system of law in place that ideally applies equally to all of us, doesn't always, but there are legal means by which we can work to correct that and fix it. Still, the fact that we are all bound by the law, pretty fundamental part of what joins us as a nation. Accountability, the idea that when we give power to political leaders, they are accountable to us for how they use it. Processes of government that we all agree to, free and fair elections, the rule of law, accountability, and the simple fact and belief in democracy. The fact of democracy, the fact that we, the people, are front and center. It relies on us fundamentally. Politicians are public servants. That seems to be hard for some people to remember sometimes, but still, that's what joins us as a nation. So to bring this back to January 6th, that was an attack on us. That was an attack on our place in politics. That was an attack that was political and partisan and constitutional, and to be completely honest with you, emotional. I felt traumatized by what I saw that day. I still do when I think about it, because of the symbolism and the realism of what that day represented. And in ways that certainly for me, and I suspect for many of you out there, are new and different. I understand what it means to be an American and how I feel as an American in very different ways than I did, I don't know, 10 years ago. I do. I understand what it means to be an American very differently. And I understand myself as an American very differently. And I understand it in a more powerful way and in a more immediate way and in a more personal way and in a more gripping way. And some of that is because of January 6th. Because on that day, I felt like so many other people felt, I felt violated. It's my government, my country. I'm part of it. I'm a citizen. This election represents me and what I want and everyone else. And I might lose, but my will, my vote matters. So I felt traumatized and I felt violated by what happened on January 6th because it's us. It's me. It's you, regardless of whether we agree or not. And actually, because we disagree, that's why that process matters. So I don't think, as Scott Walker said, that it's tone deaf to assume that people still care about January 6th. I think this last week, even apart from the Jack Smith report, I think the fact that during the debate, J.D. Vance was asked whether he thought that Trump had won the election in 2020 or not. And his response was, I'm thinking towards the future. So he refused to answer. And the person who called him on that was Waltz, was not the moderators. Waltz said that's a damning non-answer. The fact that that, in a sense, was the moment of that debate, when the fundamental fact, are you going to say that that election happened the way it happened and you're going to not deny what now has been proven to be the truth? You're going to buy into reality here and say, okay, you know, Vance could have said, yeah, we lost that one, but we're not going to lose this one, or some other thing. Any other number of ways he could have answered that question and still been a loyalist to his cause. No, he chose to basically suggest throughout his comments that Trump gracefully, willingly gave up power, and somehow also that he actually won that election. Certainly wasn't going to concede that he lost it. That became the moment of that debate, and rightfully so. It's a debate over an election that's about to happen, and there is one of the vice presidential candidates saying, I don't believe in the last election. Vote for me. Problematic, to say the least. But that, with the Scott Walker comment, all by themselves had me gripping my fist because I really, truly had not thought about until this last week the degree to which I will never be over what happened on January 6th. If you'd asked me, I would have said so. But I'm feeling it in my gut right now because of what was said and what was released this past week. I think everything that I mentioned before, process, free and fair elections, rule of law, accountability, democracy, all of those things were bound up in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, all of them. And we have not fully worked our way through the meaning of what happened that day because some people are denying it. So I wanted to say here and now, in this week, when I did not expect this to be what I am talking about, I wanted to say that January 6th matters fundamentally to all of us, regardless of our politics, regardless of what side we're on. That was an attack on all of us. And if you counter that by saying, yeah, but the people who were attacking because of something I think the election was unfair. Okay, you have a right to think the election was unfair. And there's an actual process you can use to contest it. Violence and attacking the people's house is not the process. So no, I will never get over what happened on January 6th. I will remember it forever, partly because of how I felt that way, and partly because it was as Thomas Jefferson would put it, a fire bell in the night. It was an alarm awakening, I suspect, many of us to the simple fact that the process, our process of government, matters, fundamentally matters, and that when it is violated, we are violated as a people. Okay, I got up on my soapbox. It's I'm stopping 3 minutes early. I want to open things up, and I'm getting myself all riled up. So I'll. Oh, mug. Thank you, Cara Lee. See, I'm in new surroundings. I have an unstable connection. I do have a mug, and it is a mug that it's a New Haven mug. So I've used it once before, I think, when I was in New Haven, and it represents how I feel about people dismissing January 6th as being important. It's in the past. We don't need to think about it anymore. So for those of you who are new, who have not been here before, every week, I don't know what this is, 200 and something. Cara Lee has to tell me what number of episode this is. 236. Okay, this is our 236 episode of History Matters. I've always had a mug to reflect that in some way reflects on what we're talking about. I do not have 236 mugs. However, at any rate, today's mug, that's how I feel about people claiming that January 6th is over. This is how I feel. It doesn't say it on it. I believe there's a coffee outlet, a cafe in New York called Mr. Grumpy. Someone's going to be able to tell me about it. I think this is from Mr. Grumpy, the coffee house. But at any rate, that is my sentiment right now on trying to dismiss January 6th as being of no interest to anybody anymore. Okay.
I need a Mr. Grumpy mug.
It's even without January 6th, it just says so much, right?
You don't need words on that mug. It says it all.
I love the mug. And I forgot about it. And when I started setting up for today, there was Cafe Grumpy. Thank you, Cara Lee. There was Mr. Grumpy waiting for me on my table. So it wanted to be used.
It's very appropriate for this topic. All right, we've got lots of great questions. So are you ready to dig in?
I'm ready. Let's hope. And you guys have been able to hear me throughout, right?
Yes, yes. And we can see you and
perfect.
It's all
Okay. Good.
Okay. Our first question comes from one of our favorite undergrads ever, Sydney, who is in Georgia, and she was celebrating Jimmy Carter's birthday this week, as many of us were. Yeah. So Sydney asked, has there been any other events in U.S. history like January 6th? And if so, how are they similar or different? And if not, what has allowed such an event to happen?
Well, there have been, I mean, very different kinds of events, but certainly, um, events that felt like an attack on the United States. I mean, the first thing that pops into one's head is an actual act of war, which is Pearl Harbor, right? Which is an actual attack on the United States. And, I don't know if any of us here were alive to remember that. Uh, but whether we do or don't, um, I being at war is horrific in and of itself. War on your home turf is a trauma. So certainly there are any number of events in American history, broadly speaking, that have been acts of that have felt like a violation against the American people, not just acts of war. Um, the other question as to what allows them to happen, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, it really does depend on, well, I've said this before. And this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I don't mean it to be. So democracy is wonderfully open-ended. It allows infinite outcomes, right? It follows along by what we the people want it to do, right? That's ideally speaking, that's how democracy works. What that means is that sometimes we can go in very strange directions, right? It's an open-ended system in the sense that people can express their will, can join together, can become a political force, can want things to happen, can make things happen. And sometimes those things that they're making happen are dangerous or profoundly problematic in a variety of different ways. So the long and probably unsatisfying answer to that question as to what allows it to happen, our system, the very thing that is the glory of our system, which is that it's grounded on us, we the people, means that it is vulnerable to we the people. And things can happen in it and to it that we may not like. That's part of why it's such a convenient system for terrorists to attack, because in some ways it makes us a soft target because we don't have absolute walls. We the people making decisions. We have the will of the public and the fact that we can make things happen that other people don't necessarily want to happen. It's the freedom of choice, our elections, which are the glory of our system. This is why some of the founding generation were not happy about democracy, right? That Alexander Hamilton, really not happy about the fundamentals of democracy. He did not think the people were fit to govern on a certain level. He thought, fine, let them put a president or let them vote people into office, and then they can shut up and get out of the way and let their betters govern. And he's not the only one who thought that. But part of what he did not like was the fact that the people had so much power under seemingly our government, and that he considered that, and many other people did too. He considered that dangerous because the people could be swayed, the people could be influenced, the people didn't necessarily understand what was happening around them. And all of that's possible in a democratic system of governance. So, it is our glory as a system of government is that we matter. We do. We forget that we do sometimes, but we do. But what that means is that we are responsible in ways that we might not always be aware that we are responsible, and we should be.
Do you think a lot of times living here in Charlottesville, of course, what happened in 2017 here with Unite the Right is still, it's
Yeah.
just part of our, I mean, you can't not think about it sometimes. And I can't remember who it was one time said that they thought that that was almost like a dress rehearsal for January 6th.
Oh, interesting.
And I've had more than one person say that to me when they find out I live near here. But I'm wondering, I just put in the chat the two backstory episodes that you guys did. You did one right after Unite the Right, and then you did one a year later. And I still can't tell you, and I've told Dr. Ayers this many times, those two episodes meant so much to the kids here, at least, and the families here. And I know other people around the country because they've told me that. But I'm just wondering, when we looked at January 6th, of course, all I could think about was that day, or that night, and then the next morning. It was really a 2-day event. But is that something that they were planning and they thought, well, let's see how this goes? I don't know.
That I don't know. But what I can say is the fundamental feeling that there has been a violation of your community, a violation of your home, and people very openly declaring hate of people on a level that violates what community stands for? Absolutely. I mean, of course it would be traumatic. Of course it would have the same impact in that sense, in a more general sense. Is it like January 6th in the sense that there were people who stepped forward and violated violated the us that makes a community, a town, a city, a nation? Did it violently? Did it aggressively? Did it through hate? Yeah. Yes, they are very much the same. And they very much, and I wasn't even in Charlottesville when it happened, and I felt that it was a personal attack, having lived there for so
Right.
long.
Right.
Um, and being Jewish, which was also charming for them to attack every way in which I could feel attacked. But I think the kind of attack that it was and the way in which it fundamentally attacked who we consider ourselves to be in a community level and on a broad national level, that's an attack that goes to the heart of us individually and of us as a nation, and it matters in a different kind of a way. So yeah, I would link that in and call that another kind of moment of the one that I was just talking about.
All right, our good friend Daniel, who's with us very often, asks, how is the memory of January 6th any different from Civil War revisionism and a Gone with the Wind view of the Confederacy?
So we are watching attempts at historical revisionism, right? When people say, well, and we saw it immediately. I don't remember who said near January 6th that it was just another day of tourism. Remember that? Right. I mean, it's still hard to believe, but yeah. So immediately there were people trying to pretend that it didn't happen. And I suspect that will never stop, that there will be people who will always be trying for purposes, partisan purposes, personal purposes, political purposes, whatever purposes, to pretend that what happened that day didn't happen. So yeah, in that sense, is it like, people and the lost cause sort of idea of the Civil War? Is it people creating lessons of the past by misinterpreting and sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Inaccurately portraying history, misinterpreting it, warping it for their own purposes? Yeah, that's eternal. That's eternal throughout time, for sure. But the important thing about that is, and this is a here we are at History Matters kind of thing to think about, history is subject to that because history matters. It matters, and it has to be actually remembered for what it was. So we live in a time when we're watching people, Scott Walker, others, pretend that what happened that day didn't mean anything, wasn't important, didn't really happen, Trump gave power gracefully, whatever else it is you want to say. We are witnesses. All of us are witnesses to what happened that day. Whatever your politics are, we saw people attack the Capitol, and they wanted to stop the electoral process. It happened. It happened, period. And that's a violation of our democratic process. We can argue all we want about meanings and implications, but that's a fact, and that happened, and it's going to remain a sort of fundamental marking point in American history. So yeah, that people are going to continue to misinterpret or ignore it as they did from the outset. And we the people, I'm going to say that 1,000 times today, we the people can prevent that from taking hold.
I love every time you say we the people, because right downstairs, it's a We the People conference that I'm attending.
Oh,
And I put in the chat while we were waiting for you to log in. They host that competition for high school kids and middle school kids every year. So there's a new documentary coming out on PBS about the kids and the competition, and it kind of gives us hope that there are still kids that care about democracy. So it just makes me giggle every time you say it. Okay, our good friend Gloria, who also is with us very often. We love Gloria. Gloria says, I think the rule of law is very important. However, are you not pronouncing someone guilty without due process? Innocent till proven guilty. Is it a partisan process of accountability, real accountability?
Well, I think so a partisan process of accountability. Um, I think saying that someone potentially committed a crime and deserves a trial, I don't think that's a partisan process of accountability if they get a fair trial. But in one way or another, jury of their peers or however the justice system sees it fit, I don't see that as a partisan attack. Um, that's what the rule of law is about. And yes, innocent till proven guilty. So if you seemingly, if you are suspected of having committed a crime, you're brought to trial, and you're due a fair trial. You are not supposed to be assumed to be guilty when you go to trial. That's what the trial is for. But I don't think having a trial and applying the rule of law in a fair way with the necessary amount of evidence to justify a trial, I don't think that that's unfair. But I think all of those things have to be met. It has to be a fair trial. There has to be a reason for it. It has to be justifiable. There actually has to be evidence. And then, yes, whoever is being brought to trial is not assumed to be guilty at the outset of a trial. That is the rule of law. That is what the rule of law should be. And so if one was being attacked and brought to trial with no evidence at all, just prosecute them all. That's a problem. But if there's actual evidence, like real evidence enough that a court of law can say, okay, we actually at least need to talk about this, that is what the rule of law is supposed to do.
All right. So someone who is just have the initials DB. So I'm not sure if DB's been with us before, but welcome. DB asks, in the infamous 1876 presidential election, was there any violence or threats made against the members of the Electoral Commission?
Wait, repeat the question for me.
In the infamous 1876 presidential election, was there any violence or threats made against members of the Electoral Commission?
Oh, that I can't answer absolutely, because I don't want to say what I think is the case without knowing concrete evidence. Hey, there, I'm supporting my rule of law trial. I can't answer that question without feeling like I'm wading off onto thin ice. So I'm going to hold back on answering that question. That's Doug.
Okay.
He is Doug
Oh,
Burbank.
Doug.
Yes.
Okay.
I do want to hang on for a sec.
Here, Tim could probably look it up. He's our fact checker link guy.
Yeah, but someone just said something in the chat that media has pronounced guilty. We're talking about oh, Gloria says the media has pronounced what? Trump guilty? Is that what that is saying?
Not sure who Gloria was responding to on that one.
Yeah.
It goes so fast.
It's a different oh, she says yes, that the media has pronounced him guilty of what? Anyway, obviously this is a conversation and it's hard to do it bit by bit in chat, but I do think different conversation. But the media and its role and what it's doing right now, that's a conversation that we could have. Maybe that happens next week. I don't know. We'll see what happens next week. But there's certainly a lot going on in the way that the media is and isn't covering current events that I certainly have a lot of emotional responses to, but I will want to think about the kind of response that I will have here when we talk about it in a non-emotional, more thoughtful kind of way. Oh, I see. Gloria says that the guilt that Trump is guilty of starting and causing the Capitol crisis. What we had actually, we had Jack Smith come out with that report. Apparently, in 2 weeks, the Trump team can come out with a counter report. So again, I can't speak for the media. I can't tell you what the media has or hasn't done, but the process is ongoing, I guess, is part of what I would say. So the report, Jack Smith's report, is part of it.
All right. Kathy Porter, another longtime community member, asks, I think we learned in 2020 that norms and practices play a great role in our democracy. How can we strengthen our government or have better guardrails for future elections?
That's a big question. And that I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. One of the um, shocks, and what's funny about being a political historian in this moment is that I keep getting shocked by things that intellectually I knew, but I didn't feel, right? And norms is one of them. If you asked me ever in the distant past, what I thought about norms, I would say, and I have said many times, right? The Constitution is so brief and it's skeletal, and norms are part of what prop our system up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is true. But watching norms get just violated, some of them trivial norms, but norms nonetheless, seeing that happening and then realizing the degree to which there's kind of nothing you can do about it because it's not a law isn't being overturned. There isn't, a guardrail that's actually a rail that's being in some way tossed aside. Norms are vital, and we have sort of taken them for granted. And I think certainly it feels as though one of the lessons of the semi-recent past is maybe there need to be some more guardrails or some more something built in so that it's not quite so easy to overturn ideas and norms and practices that we took for granted and that have now been revealed to be actually only there by common consent. That's again an ongoing lesson of our times, but has been in the semi-recent past. Some of what we're learning is that norms are only norms. I mean, I remember and guardrails. I agree that that's the best term for it in a sense. Just not walls, not barriers, but guardrails to sort of like you know, literally guard against bad things happening, but not a wall. Now I forgot where I was just going with guardrails before I got excited by the word guardrails. Um, oh, one of the first trivial minor things that suddenly made me realize the degree to which norms were norms was very early on in Trump's presidency. He got on a Air Force One to go somewhere, and he didn't turn around and wave. He just got on the plane. And it gave me pause, right? Because I thought, actually, normally when a president goes off on a trip, they turn around and wave to the press, right? We all have that image in our head. And I thought to myself, why is that jarring to me? And I realized it's because the president in waving to the press is waving to us, right? Like, hey, heading off, people. It's an acknowledgement of others. And when Trump got on the plane and didn't do that, he just never bothered to acknowledge the press, us, or anything else, which is what it felt like. And I remember, I think I even went on, this is a long time ago, went on Twitter and said the weirdest thing, he didn't turn to wave, and that actually affected me and felt somehow wrong. And then there was a conversation about how, oh yeah, like that was weird. Something was weird. I didn't know what was weird. That was a norm that in and of itself means nothing. But the implication of it was like weirdly jarring in an almost subconscious way that then when I stopped to think about it, I realized what it meant. So norms sometimes have a psychological or emotional importance, and that doesn't mean they're not important. That might, in some ways, might mean they're more important because they frame how we understand what's going on around us politically and otherwise.
All right, we've just got a couple more questions. I think we can squeeze them in. All right, this one comes from our good buddy Dave, who's with us from Wisconsin. He says, stipulated that the process is critical in the forming of our constitutional pact. How important was the assumption that men of honor would serve as elected officials honorably? For example, norms and behavior versus laws.
Well, so here's an important aspect of, speaking as a historian who's written a lot about honor and why it's important. There's a way to misunderstand that that almost ends up sounding nostalgic. So when I write about earlier times and about how honor was important, I'm not saying, the good old days when everybody was honorable. There is no time ever when everyone was honorable. It doesn't exist. But in the time that I've written about, the period that I've written about, the sort of late 18th, early 19th centuries, the fact that other people believed you to be honorable mattered. Your reputation mattered in politics because there weren't organized political parties in the sense that we have now. There weren't professional politicians in the sense that we have now. You were supported or backed or voted for based on your reputation, sort of writ large. And you needed to be considered an honorable man. In other words, someone who kept your word if you were going to be palatable as someone to give political power to. So men of honor, as I write about them, were not necessarily always honorable men. There's a great quote. Now I'm going to forget which historian has said it, which is horrible. It'll come to me when I no longer need it. There's a historian who said, men of honor, in the way that I'm talking about them now, men of honor don't care if they stink. They care if someone tells them they're stinking, right? That what matters is what other people think of you. So I don't think like Hamilton, who's like, definitely not an idealist, he never thought that there would be like eternally men of honor to take power. He thought of our political system as a way to channel selfishness and passions. We had to come up with a system that channeled all the bad things that we will naturally do and that will channel them in a way that will work in some way for our greater benefit. So there has never been a moment when everyone was honorable. And there was never an assumption that everyone would be honorable. But the honor as like a possession, a concrete possession, which is the way that I've written about it, how they felt about it in the late 18th, early 19th century, that's a different thing. And then it becomes a political tool, because if you're supposed to be a man of honor to be a politician, then dishonoring someone is a really good political attack. And that's the sort of stuff that my work focuses on, or has focused on in the past.
All right, we've got a lot of love for Carolee going on in the chat. They want to clone her so that more students can be in her class, which I would agree.
Yeah, I would agree too.
We have many good teachers like Carolee out there, which is the only thing that still gives me hope. Okay, Robert Hurst asks, is it not equal remembrance? He has that in quotes. Is it not equal remembrance on the part of those advocating for those convicted for their actions in January 6th to be released?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
He's asking, like, is this some sort of a form of remembrance? I think he's referring back to like the Civil War, Gone with the Wind kind of remembrance. Dr. Ayers calls it nostalgia usually, makes that distinction. So he's asking, are these people who are saying to let these people out who were convicted of January 6th part of that same sort of remembrance?
Oh, well, I mean, I do think it goes to the fact that we're still wrestling with what January 6th means. And that whatever we do is going to have an impact on what it means. And I think some of what I suppose I've been talking about this morning is the simple fact that although people would like to say we've decided what it means and it's no longer important, I don't think that's true. And I don't think that's true for a lot of people. Now, again, I'm speaking for myself and for people surrounding me. There may be people here who feel that actually they're done worrying about it or thinking about it, which is, again, valid. If that is how you feel, that is how you feel. I'm not going to say you shouldn't. But what to me this last week shows is that that's not a done deal. We haven't decided what it means yet. And so remembrance can be sort of how we're remembering it in passing, and remembrance can be how we're strategically structuring things so that we remember it in a certain way that will have the impact that we want it to have. And I still think we're in it. I don't think we're out of it. And I think in part, this election is keeping it alive in a more gripping, immediate way than perhaps it has been in the semi-recent past. We're heading into an election, and here it is again. And it almost, is hard to imagine not thinking about that as we approach an election with the particular candidate running who is running.
Yeah. So David Brem, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. And David, if you're new to us, I think this is the one that had DB earlier, and he's put his full name in now. It says, for those that have served, an oath was administered. I, for one, took that oath seriously. Is this apparent lack of that in all too many politicians and a general lack of being held to it a recent thing, or has it been going on all along?
So have public servants not felt accountability for a long time?
Taking those oaths seriously, I think.
Taking the oath seriously. Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I know I've thought about this before, because in the period that I normally write about, they took oaths really seriously, like really seriously. And this goes back to honor. If you pledge your sacred honor on something, that actually had a meaning. It wasn't just words. So, I do think in some way, and I can't quantify this, and I don't have evidence for this, it feels to me as though the meaning of oaths, the power of oaths, the pull of them, the weight of taking an oath is somehow less than it might have been at some point in the past. But I also think, kind of along the lines of the person who asked that question, there are many, many, many people who understand fundamentally what it means to take an oath. And you are pledging yourself in a you know, often religious way, because often God is involved, in the making of an oath. That's a serious matter. So it's not just words, but I don't know how powerful that remains for everybody, because I do think, in a sense, oaths, it's a very old practice, very old practice. So some people might have lost the power and implications of what an oath means.
All right, we literally only have one question left and we have 4 minutes. We can do this.
Oh my gosh. Okay, this is
No, right? This never happens. Okay, so Dave again asks about your thoughts on Liz Cheney joining Vice President Harris yesterday in Wisconsin. Dave is from Wisconsin, I believe. So he's just wondering if you have any thoughts on that whole, I mean, it's not every day that somebody who from the opposite party goes actively
no.
campaigning. I mean, there are kind of some strange times we're living in.
We live in strange times. So, I've been thinking about that on a lot of levels. Number one, I'm happy for it. I don't agree with a lot of what Liz Cheney stands for. But I appreciate the fact that she is saying what happened on January 6th happened on January 6th, and it matters, and that person should not be president. I think that fact in and of itself is good. Now, I know, we are in a time where people talk about purity tests for candidates. Like, if a candidate for office doesn't fundamentally agree in every way we want them to with what we want, that somehow we can't support that person. And there's a reason why people are discussing that, and I understand that, and there's a logic for that, and there's a power for that as well. But I also think purity tests in times of crisis can be problematic. And if you say you're not going to vote for people who, for example, are going to defend democracy, but the other things they stand for you hate, well, I'll take them on democracy. I'm not going to support them. I'm not going to vote for them. I'm not going to do anything to help along their career. But if they're going to help us get out of this moment so that we can continue to use the democratic process to do what we want with it, and as the democratic process will allow, once we have protected it, we can then step forward and say, you know what, that other policy you have, sorry, you're not getting my support for that. I think I support what she did, and I support what she did because at this moment, this specific moment, October 2024, it is not exaggeration. It is not hyperbole to say that democracy is on the ballot. It isn't. Now my phone is yelling at me too. Okay, I'm turning off my phone. That democracy is on the ballot. It is. And people want to dismiss that as exaggeration. And it isn't exaggeration. So given that that's the case, at a moment of crisis, you don't turn away the person who's going to help at least get you past the crisis. You don't turn away the person with the water bucket helping to put out a fire because you don't like the politics of the water bucket holder. You know what I mean? You take the water bucket. Later, you then say, thanks for doing that, but I'm still going to totally set myself against you and overcome any attempt you may have to get power. But in a crisis, oh my God, there's like people talking to me all over the place here. In a crisis, you have to get out of the crisis before you can then step forward and push the people who deserve to be pushed out of the way, out of the way. And if we all stand back and only support pure candidates, we're not going to get out of this crisis. And then it won't matter. Purity won't matter. We won't be able to have an impact on anything if we don't at least preserve the democratic process. So I guess that's my thought.
We cleared the Q&A, which doesn't happen very often. See, John, you picked a
1
good
minute.
day. John, you picked a good day to join us.
Look, yes, right. See, we may have had a Facebook problem, John, but we finished with 1 minute
You
over.
cleared the deck.
I'm trying to see.
Oh, someone says that someone popped in a question at the end there. Oh, look at that.
Oh, okay.
I thought we were done. Well, it's up to you. It's 11 o'clock.
Let's see what the question is.
Okay, Linda popped a question. I heard an interview on NPR with a voter saying he voted his entire life for Democrats. He's voting for Harris, but for Republicans down the ballot because he thinks our government functions better when there's a split. How do we convince voters that we need Democrats in charge of executive and legislative for those guardrails of democracy to prevent another J6 moment?
Um, Again, I suppose part of the answer to that has to do with the fundamental belief that we really are at a crisis point. So I don't think the government necessarily functions best when it's all one party. One party government is not a good thing. So I would not say everything all the time, always should be of the party that I want it to be. I would say that right now one has to think carefully of who one's voting for. In both parties, but if you're going to vote Republican, you darn well better know what that Republican is all about, and what they're going to support and how they may or may not stand up for something. Because the fact of the matter is, with a Republican president, with a Democratic president and two Republican houses, that's not going to be functional government at this particular moment in time. You know, I can't make a universal statement about that because I don't think the moment that we're in stands out for a whole bunch of reasons. A fundamental one being that we do have one of our two major parties, a good number of people in that party no longer are committed to the democratic political process. And that's just a fact. And that makes this a weird moment and a dangerous moment in a distinctive kind of a way. And that needs to be in our brain and before our eyes as we vote and as we think about what we're going to do politically.
That's a good place to stop.
That felt like an ending thing.
Really good.
Okay, so let me explain what's going to happen next. We are now going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording so that we can be even freer and easier in our conversation than we were before. If you beamed in through NCHE, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. Well, I guess you're not watching us on Facebook because we never got to Facebook, I think. Normally, I would say if you're on Facebook, you have to leave and go to NCHE, but you're all here through NCHE. I will say anyway that the NCHE place you would need to go is ncheteach.org/conversations, ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too would, if you were on Facebook, poof, be in the after party. How can I not say that at the end?
I've done it like 4 times a day. I don't think we have a bingo card anymore, but somebody would have won bingo.
Yeah, big time. At any rate, I do want to thank you all for being here as ever and for engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, we're going to have a lot to talk about over the coming weeks. I don't even have to like pretend that maybe that's not true. That's going to be true. The question will be, what thing will we be talking about? Thank you for being here for this. Thank you, my partner in crime, Annie. Thank you, John, for putting in an appearance. Thank you, NCHE. Thank you, Claire, even though you're not here. Thank you, Jessica, for making this possible for so long in such a good way. And honestly, actually, you know what? I will mention one last thing. I did record, for those of you who might not know this, I recorded, I think, late night thoughts on democracy and us that I put up on my YouTube page. I wanted to be here last week because I wanted to have one last History Matters episode with Newbie's Cage behind me. So it killed me to not be well enough to do that. So I did it anyway. But I encourage you to go watch that because actually what it's about, it happens to have Newbie behind me. But what it actually is about is what we are feeling right now and how this moment has changed us, I think, as how we feel about being Americans and how we should be thinking over the course of the next month. So I actually will mention while it's in my brain, go find it on my YouTube page, and I posted it in a variety of different places. It's Late Night Thoughts About Democracy and Us, I think is what I titled it.
Carolee put it in the chat. And John, I'm wondering, since we didn't have a video from last week, we did meet very briefly, just to let folks know what was going on. But I'm wondering, John, could we link the Late Night Thoughts one to last week so that when people go into the archive, the
Oh.
teachers that want to use it and other people will find it.
I could record a brief thing that says, you know, we didn't meet, but whatever
It would
that
be
we could
good to
tag
have
on.
them all in one place, you know,
Yeah,
so people
yeah.
don't have to hunt for 'em.
No, that's a good that I know my record will be intact. That's a good idea.
Right.
Uh,
Don, it's up
okay.
to you. You're in charge.
That's right. But I could certainly very easily record a minute of something saying, um, we didn't have a session, but I did make a statement and here, whatever it is. So.
Oh. So you are in your not really a new place.